Republicans both on and off the campaign trail saying that President Obama shouldn't have the right to pick the next Supreme Court justice. But a Republican who knows more about the Supreme Court than they do says not so fast. I'm talking about Sandra Day O'Connor, the one-time Supreme Court justice. Ronald Reagan put her on the bench, and she had this to say today.
We need somebody there now to do the job, and let's get on with it.
And for more on the high drama over the high court, we spoke with Washington Post Supreme Court reporter Robert Barnes. You know, I was looking at recent pieces that you had wrote, and in one of them you had talked about, before the passing of Scalia, that Justice Roberts was concerned about the perception of the Supreme Court, that it was seen as yet another political arm, and the skepticism that was attached as a consequence. With what has happened since Scalia's passing, I gotta figure the Chief Justice, let alone everyone on the bench, is worried that it becomes even worse, right?
I think that you're absolutely right about that. I think that this is sort of the worst scenario that the Chief Justice can imagine. What he said is, when confirmation hearings get so partisan and when it is seen as a win for one side and a loss for another, that whoever comes out, the nominee comes out of this as seen being tied to one side or another, the winning side, and thus very partisan in nature. He thinks that that's a very bad thing for the court.
Let's, if we could, Robert, first talk about the cases. We'll get to the politics. On the case front, talk about some of both the current cases that the court had yet to rule on, and theoretically on ideological lines there'd be a 4-4 split, everything from cases involving abortion, immigration, unions. Tie, in effect, goes back to the lower court, which would have been holdings, really, which would have supported the more progressive side. These would be losses on issues important to conservatives, wouldn't they?
Well, not terribly losses, but not big wins either. What I've said is that this really blunts the possibility of very big, sort of far-reaching conservative wins. And that's because, as you say, when there's a 4-4 tie, that just affirms the lower court decision, but it doesn't write an opinion that settles the issue for the whole country. So, for instance, it looked like the unions in California, the public teachers unions, who are allowed to extract a fee from non-members to pay for collective bargaining costs. It looked like they were going to lose after oral arguments with 5 of the conservatives very much against them. But with Justice Scalia's vote not counting, that would leave it 4-4, and the lower court in that case had ruled for the union, so that would leave that decision intact. On other cases, however, the abortion restrictions in Texas, for instance, in that case, a lower court said that they were constitutional. So if the court split 4-4 on that, that meant that that restrictive Texas law would remain in place.
In terms of future cases, maybe the most far-reaching abortion case was going to come before the court. So as well was that affirmative action case also out of Texas at UT as it relates to admissions. And we had a few others as well, also religious objections, presidential power. Now, given the makeup of the court, at least as currently constituted, those are going to be very possibly 4-4 votes again, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. There's a great possibility about that. And what that would mean is no real resolution on those for the whole country. The individual cases might be resolved, but it wouldn't set standards for the whole country. And, you know, one thing that we haven't talked about very much in this is if there is not a nominee and a confirmation, the same thing will happen next year as well. The new president won't take office until January. The nomination process of filling the court seat would take at least a few months, probably 3 to 4 months. It's kind of a lost year for the court as well, as far as these very divisive issues.
I'm curious, given that you're in the Beltway, Robert, what you and your colleagues over the Post are hearing, what do you think when they go in the cloakroom and Republican senators talk to each other, do they find more politically dangerous not giving a fair hearing to a candidate, even if it's perception, and give a vote, or actually go through the process and then risk the enmity of the Republican right here, whether it be on talk radio or what they'll hear on the campaign trail. They seem to have put themselves in a real box. Which do they think is the worst of the two scenarios?
Well, you know, I think that the fact is that the Republican Senate has enough votes to vote down any of the president's nominees if they want to. And so the problem would come if the president comes up with a candidate that is very popular, or that if people think really does deserve a real vote. But I can tell you that both sides, and I think, you know, Republicans are in the tough position here, but Democrats would do the same. They think that a long-lasting change on the Supreme Court is more important than almost anything right now, because it's a very closely divided court, and the court in the last few years has really been taking on some of the most important decisions and issues in American political life: same-sex marriage, the Affordable Care Act, immigration. Those are very big issues. The court is very important in that, and I think both sides really sees it as a huge test.
Finally, and I'm going to ask you to first guess on this, Robert, what is the name you're hearing more prominently, and what are you hearing from a timetable from the administration, since they already said that they will submit a name? Who do you think it'll be, and when do you think we'll hear it?
Well, I should tell you I have no idea who it should be, or who it will be, rather. And so I am speculating along with anyone else. There are two trains of thoughts on this. One, if the president thinks he really doesn't have a chance to get a confirmation, that he would nominate someone who would appeal to the Democratic base, someone that would excite voters if they think that that person has been mistreated by the Republican Senate. I think if the president thinks that there is a chance of getting a confirmation, that might tilt toward looking at a federal judge that has already been approved by the Senate. And there are a couple of those whose names are mentioned most often. I would say Sri Srinivasan, who would become the first Asian American on the Supreme Court if he were nominated and confirmed. There's a judge named Jane Kelly in Iowa. She was swept through the confirmation process faster than any of the other judges that the president nominated. She was unanimously confirmed, and she is a favorite of Senator Grassley, the Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So those are a couple of names that you hear a lot.
And when do you think we'll hear a name, Robert?
Tough to say. You know, this process usually takes a month or so. When there's an opening, the White House already has a list of people it knows that it wants to talk to. It would seem to me in this case the process might be faster than that. Justice Scalia's funeral is on Saturday. I certainly don't think you would expect anything before then. But then I think the process could move pretty quickly.
All right, good enough, and we will follow, of course. Robert Barnes from the Washington Post. Robert, thank you for the time.
You're very welcome.
All right, when we come back, the panel will weigh in here on the political implications of the looming Supreme Court battle.